Here we go again. It's ostensibly the start of a new week for me. I'm trying to open myself up to new possibilities, new things, new people, new rituals. See what kind of patterns we can form this week and see which old patterns are healthy to conform to from the weeks before. I think trying to be more social is really key today. There's such a feeling of ostracization, a lot of the time not even for any reason other than plain being antisocial, being separate, having walls. I find it very interesting that one of the key ingredients in drywall is salt. For all you alchemists out there, protecting us from the witness of our neighbors. Or should I say insulating us from the witness of our neighbors. It's not so necessary, or it doesn't make a lot of sense to call it a protection if it seems like you'd be much safer if you knew your neighbors and you could reconcile, whatever differences you may or may not have, and you could be there for each other. Form some sort of a loose network, Well, we live where we live by necessity. A lot of people make the best of it, and we do meet a lot of good folk. But in general, we don't really know our neighbors that well. That's to say, who really cares when anyone, everybody has going home in common. I don't think that that's something that we want to share in common with the people who we choose to put in our lives. As much as it does feel like we choose the people in our lives, there are many, many times where it feels like people just sort of appear out of the forest. And so when I keep my mind open, something else chooses for me. And that's not to say I'm absent-minded, because it's really important to know what it is that's choosing for me. What type of forces I've aligned myself with before I go out and just accept what has been given to me. I know that people in the grips of their folly, their unrealized folly, you could even say, are often brought into the radar of very, very strange people. The law of attraction works both ways. I think if you have your head sturdy and straight on your shoulders, you'll bring good people, but if you're kind of whack, and you might just bring in some extremely whack people. There's something about feedback between two people too. That's not to say that these people aren't to be spoken with and not to be learned from, but you gotta ask yourself, based on what is coming into your life, am I doing the right thing right now? You will bring people like you into your life simply by virtue of being yourself. People will see what you're doing. They'll be the places that you are. The forest, for example. You'll meet these people, and you'll find that beyond the forest, you have other things in common too. Because what leads a young person to walk in the woods? with everything, everything else available at a mere whim. What leads a young person to walk into the woods? A lot of us didn't learn it from our parents. Our parents don't really appreciate the peace and quiet. Maybe they got too much of it growing up on the farm. And maybe everything was just so new and exciting for them. For the first time, cell phones. For the first time, the automobile. For the first time, color TV. For the first time, good movies that don't look like shit. I've lived my whole life in the media matrix. Television has been there since the moment I was born. The Simpsons has been there longer than I have, and it has affected my perception of culture quite a bit. And if just that one show can affect my perception of culture just that much, I imagine what the entire matrix does. You think, what are the important things in life? And a lot of people will say, oh, well, people like me, I really like music, I really like movies, I really like art, I like creativity. And you think about it and it's like, okay, that's kind of, there are two versions of that. There's like the one that you create and your friends create, and then there's the one that you probably listen to like most of the time when you were growing up. Like I feel like a lot of people just like listen to Nirvana. Read like George Orwell, Aldous Huxley, like Nietzsche, Camus, Dostoevsky. Maybe you listen to other music too, like. But there's a huge difference between what you listen to that's actually like mass media and what you're able to listen to like that people create. How do you feel? There's a certain safety in listening to what your friends have created or what people from around town have created. The agenda is a lot more humble. Because what is a band at a global level? Certainly the musicians have their ideas of what they are trying to do with the music, with the touring, with the message. But I think it's really interesting often that labels and institutions decide which bands rise to popularity. And why does it always seem so dark? I think partly as an articulation of our society and culture, sure. The artist is influenced by the world. But I think when we give our energy to those things, to the art which is formed by the darkness of the world, the alleged darkness of the world, I think that we begin to see it as we begin to see everything that we study. And constant exposure to dark arts. That's what it is. You listen to Korn, it's a dark art. It's dark. It's art. But I think that constant exposure to dark arts will have an effect on the psyche. We have to be aware of what we're putting into our bodies. It's not so much that they will corrupt us inherently, But I think our perception of the material which we take in, having been washed around in our brains a few times before being regurgitated or put differently, I think that when that process occurs is when we're subject to feeding negative things, to feeding potentially evil things. We must be very careful. I think the status quo of society right now is fairly evil. It's pretty dark. I don't know. And you can feel it like a physiological response. Walk into a crowd of strangers these days, and there's this absolute feeling of compression. And it's the will and the body and the mind that can overcome this. I feel personally myself expanding. I don't know if it's because I'm a contrarian by nature, but when the world tries to compress me, I only feel the urge to expand. When the world tries to say there are too many people, you shouldn't have kids, you should never bring someone into this terrible world, I think the most punk thing you could ever do is raise a kid. In times where there are dragons, why not be the one to raise dragon slayers? We know the unaddressed dragon only gets bigger and bigger and becomes more and more of a problem. That's some children's book. I'm gonna go to 15. But one more thing before we leave. I wanted to mention 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. You cannot watch that movie with any perspective on the occult or the esoteric without knowing that something is being said. You definitely have a sense of something being said in that film. One of the concepts I'd like to touch on is technological evolution and adaptation. Because it seems in that movie at the beginning, The Dawn of Time with the apes, the tribes are on fairly equal footing as they war over the watering hole. Until one of the apes in one of the tribes discovers that he can use a bone as a weapon. That there's more room to swing, can gain more power, can crush and really do some damage without having to expend so much energy. And so the one clan of apes learns how to use these tools to attack. And they go back to the mutual watering hole with the warring clan drinking from the other side, and they begin to screech and holler. And before you know it, one of the rival apes is struck on the head with a bone. Now, I don't know precisely what was trying to be said, but I think it might have something to do with those who refuse to adapt to tools at their availability are going to have to find somewhere else to drink or perish. Hello? And it's a very dark thing, but it can be a very empowering thing. I imagine that the civilization that evolved from the clan who adapted to the use of tools around that watering hole would become one similar to the one which we are experiencing today. And perhaps the monkeys who remained in their natural state without tools, maybe they're better off. Or maybe we have to be open to adaptation. That's it.